outside developers were stopped from entering the market by this chip here that basically stopped any game that Nintendo didn't allow to be played on the console. They also did some weird things, like they split up the regions, similar to how we have now the US and our regions. However, they really went out there. So outside of the US, there were 6 main regions. PAL A, which included Australia, the UK, Ireland, Italy, and New Zealand. PAL B, which consisted of basically the rest of Western Europe. Korea had their own region. Hong Kong had their own region. And then they created a region called Asia, which Nintendo defined as Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. And we don't really know much about those regions yet. There were some few other big ones, like Brazil, Chile, South Africa, Greece, India, and Israel. They seem to all be linked to the PAL B region. We don't really know what's going on there. But in Australia, when the NES was released in 1987, around July, we don't know, thank Nintendo for that, they don't tell anyone. It was far from an instant hit like in the US and Japan. Many retailers like Maya, Toy World, Toys R Us, Dick Smith Electronics, they all stocked the NES due to its overseas fame, but sales were stagnant. If you look at the advertisements back in the day, they all talk about the grand USA hit, never talking about the Australian success, because there was none, basically. It followed behind the Sega's Master System and the SC3000, whose brand name was known for their arcade hits, but still sort of slow otherwise. Prices of consoles and games were nearly double for the NES than they were for the Sega system. As you can see from this slide, about $80 or so, 90 even you can find. And that's in 1987 money. Converting it comes up to be around $210 for one game, and one NES game at that. And sales went down eventually. I'm not sure really what happened there. It's interesting that the prices of games are still the same, despite inflation. Microcomputers in Australia and overseas in Europe, and not so much in the US, were extremely dominant. And prices of games were minuscule, like $2 or $3 a game, maybe edging on $10. And newer microsystem console computers, rather, weren't limited in their ability of hardware. We have to remember the NES and the Master System were 1983 hardware being released in 1987. They just weren't there. In the UK and Australia and Italy, Mattel, as in Barbie Mattel, launched the NES. As you can see, the UK had a few different distributors. They went through a lot of growing up to do. They had a lot of growing up to do, I guess. In Italy, the Wonderland, which was owned by Games of Wonder, then Wonder was their company, they switched to Mattel and made a linear. In Australia, luckily, we had Mattel from 1987 to around 1994 in January, give or take a month. And then we switched to Nintendo Australia. New Zealand had a company called RR Fenton, which was 60% owned by Mattel, so Mattel. In Australia, we got, in Australia, we also got different distributors, such as Metro Games, which I guess wasn't an official distributor, but they had ties to Nintendo. They were under the Playcorp group, if anyone knows that company either. They own Zara Australia, stuff like that. When we look at publishers and distributors in Australia, things get interesting as well. So of the 713 licensed NES games for the platform, approximately anyway, only 297 of those were released in PAL A. Around of that, 230 or so were officially in Australia. It's hard to define because what do we say a game that's been mass imported by a distributor from the UK, is that an Australian game? Who knows? So when looking at the history of games, we also have to look at the first party and third party games. It's, well, as we will see later, it's extremely important to define. Nintendo's publishing scheme made things incredibly hard for third party distributors, publishers, and developers to enter the market. They had a huge monopoly on what developers could do, what they could release, what publishers could release, and even how many games they could release every year. Both publishers and developers had to acquire a license from Nintendo, and if you didn't, Nintendo would pursue you legally. And as we'll discuss, they've done that. For developers, this was particularly hard because Nintendo brought terms that weren't ever talked about previously. For example, you couldn't put biblical texts in games. You couldn't put any vowels for passwords because in case kids wrote swear words, horror. And there were a lot of very weird limitations, and they were eventually dwindled off. I think there are still a couple of weird ones though. Yeah. So, and that's what I'm talking about now. Melbourne House, the Melbourne software development company of the 1990s, did fight against these restrictions, and they were successful. I'll pass it on to Helen.
Thank you, Joe. I have of this thing. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit of the history of the PAX. I figure out how to do this. Look. Okay, this is a diagram that was created by Suri from Samia. After Alfred Milgram gave a talk at ACME for the 80s, Aussie Games that rocked the world exhibition. And this shows some of the examples of the game developers that emerged out of BIM software. One of the things Alfred said he was most proud of is the role that BIM software had in sort of kick-starting the overall industry. But some of this, none of these companies may ever have existed because it was possible, because it's possible that none of these companies may ever have existed because Nintendo tried to close down BIM software. So I'm going to tell you that story. So as Josh explained, Nintendo was very famous for its controlling ways, and its ruthless rationalised business structure did a lot to shape the Australian games industry. So Nintendo in the 1980s is often sort of thought of as the saviour of the games industry. This is very much a North American narrative because it was there when North America had a games crash in 1983, caused by a sort of perfect storm of the demise of the arcades and some really lack of control over the software that was being created for home consoles. So there were a lot of bad games. So this meant that both players and investors lost interest in the games industry. So what had rapidly grown to be actually a $1 billion industry suddenly collapsed just as fast. So this, however, is okay. And then when this collapsed industry, then Nintendo came along with the NES and Super Mario Brothers and absolutely sort of reinvigorated games. But this is a narrative that is very much a North American narrative. There was no crash in Australia, there was no crash in the UK, there was no crash in Europe, there was no crash in Korea or New Zealand. Melbourne House, Melbourne's own publishing company and game development and parent company to Beam Software, they enjoyed many hit games and were a trusted brand. They published DIY books and computer games for microcomputers and microcomputer hobbyists. According to Australian Business Review, in 1984, Melbourne House owned 10% of the $30 to $35 billion British games market. However, with the sale of their publishing house in 1987 to Mastertronic, Melbourne House started to look more to America. And Alfred Milgram from Beam, he looked across there and he saw that Nintendo was selling 1.1 million NES units and he thought that here was an opportunity for Beam. So the NES was an updated version of the Famicom console, and previously Beam had disassembled the Famicom when it first came out. When it was released in 1983, Milgram had gone across to Japan and bought some Famicoms, and they were disassembled in the office, and they created a game for them, which Alfred then took to Japan and tried to sell to a publisher. And I'll read to you. He recalls, and I quote, "They laughed at us. They said, 'You don't understand the Japanese system. Isn't the same in the Western world. The way it works is that Nintendo says you're allowed to develop 3 games, and that's it.'" So Beam Software decided that they put that down to experience and moved on. But then when the NES came out, they saw another opportunity. So Beam Software reverse engineered the NES, creating a development system that was, according to Milgram, entirely derived from the disassembly of the hardware and did not use any of Nintendo's information or steal any trade secrets. Beam's plan was to sell the development system to US developers, taking a small royalty on the games made. It was an innovative concept, which would diversify their revenue, and as well as position them to develop games for the now dominant platform in the US market. So they took their NES pitch for the 1988 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas to demonstrate it, and they just made their first sale. When Nintendo's wrath came down on them, Milgram recalls, and I quote, "The word was that any publisher who signed up with Beam for a development system would lose their license, and that Nintendo would ensure that no one used Beam for development." End of quote. Nintendo threatened to put Beam out of business. Milgram recalls it as a dramatic time. He desperately tried to meet with Nintendo, eventually flying to their Seattle offices for a meeting. At the meeting, it was agreed that Beam would take its development kit off the market. In return, they would become a Nintendo accredited developer. This made Beam Software one of the very first Nintendo accredited developers in the West. So Nintendo's expressed concern about Beam's development system was that it breached copyright and might offer developers inaccurate information. But Milgram believed that the issues of control that dominated Nintendo's approach to business also played an important part in their actions. Nintendo liked to control all aspects of their business and dictated to licensees how many games they could make a year. Publishers creating games for the NES had to pay Nintendo for the manufacture of their game cartridges. This ensured Nintendo's profits, even if the games did not sell. Nintendo controlled release dates and had rigorous ideas about quality control. Nintendo required 0 defects. Nintendo would sell games to people not interested in computing. For Beam, this meant they had to completely rethink the way they made games. As with the home computing market, both designers and players had an interest in computing. The Nintendo accreditation drove a cultural change at the studio. Bill McIntosh recalls when he arrived at Beam in 1985, the atmosphere was relaxed, very campusy. Office hours were quite flexible, and Andrew was telling us he had a tendency of coming around 12, was it, Andrew? 12 o'clock, yeah, leave in the evening. Some of the designers got to explore personal interests, and Paul Key remembers the early atmosphere with fondness, and I quote, "Game studios were laid back, full of creative people, and basically devoid of pretension. Computer games were a fringe market, so no one had brain-fogging visions of world conquest. The boss called their feet a caftan. My immediate neighbours were hairy, scarecrow-like things with combat boots, or shaven-headed maniacs in bomber boots. This all suited me fine. A lot of good thinking came out of that environment." End quote. But while the culture was great, Bill McIntosh recalls that productivity could be low. He explains that these were early days, and there really wasn't any production processes. Most of the programmers and designers were all self-taught, and there were very messy coding standards. According to McIntosh, the NES changed everything for Beam. He recalls Milgram, a cool dude with a leather jacket, going on a business trip and returning in a suit. Beam was now in business of developing American publishers that expected to talk to a producer. They expected to see comprehensive design documents, schedules and milestones. Nintendo America had strict controls over what could be shown in the game, and McIntosh recalls no religious symbols, no innuendo and no political messages. And the level of controls is often referred to the Hays Code that existed for similar in America in the 20s to 40s. Nintendo accreditation, however, was a big deal. Greg Barnett recalls that when Bean was first accredited, every man and his dog came in with stupid ideas that all led to nothing. From a dancing game for California raisins, Madonna's age recalled, and even Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses contacted them about a game in which he was going to play the Antichrist. Bean's settlement with Nintendo gave them a short advantage in this new market, but as more companies in the US became accredited, it became harder for the Australian-based studio to land more interesting and lucrative titles. Bean was just too far away for the publishers to risk big money. Greg Barnett recalls that when the NES came in, it was another pioneering spirit, but it soon got lost under mediocre licenses and stuff. Bean was no longer focused on creating their own games. The work for hire model that they were now a part of had few advantages for the developer. Milestones missed resulted in financial penalties. A cancelled project could mean bankruptcy. All their hard work did not result in owning any intellectual property or profits. The changes had led to a loss of creative freedom at Bean, but it was also a time of increasing professionalism, growth and success. The studio grew in size, hiring more people and attracting talent from overseas. Bean, with its coveted license to develop for Nintendo, trained a generation of Australians to design for the publisher's system. Bill McIntosh left and founded Taurus Games. Trevor Nurin and Andrew Davie founded Tantalus Games, and these companies all worked on Nintendo licenses. Australia started to grow a games industry. Bean software was dramatically transformed by the NES. In the 1980s, Bean software finished up the decades of triumphant survivors in a rapidly changing global industry, but they were now living under Nintendo's rules. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to one of those great developers, Andrew Davie, who's going to tell his personal story about working for Bean. So please make him very welcome.
Thanks everyone. Can you hear this? Okay? Yeah, good. This is more a personal story for me, so I'm going to give you a bit of a view about this game that's been dogging me for 30 years. And hopefully I can get this personal demon off my chest. I'm not used to presenting, so we'll see how it goes. I'm not terribly organised, but I'm trying to let go of my past here. So, this is a short history of Bad Street Brawler, a game I wrote sometime around 1986, 87, something like that. And it's been reviewed as pretty much the worst Nintendo game I've ever written. At least it's in those the top 10 lists, so I actually agree with that. But it's not my fault. Hopefully I can convince you as well. So, this guy here is our hero. His name is Duke Davis, although he was also named by other people in many other versions of Kid Commodore 64, NES, Spectrum, Amiga, and the PC. I didn't get much of a say in his name or like artwork or anything like that. But we don't really need to know his name, because when I was writing this thing, it was me, okay? So you can consider this guy me when he was talking. And before we start, there's something you'd like to say to everyone in the whole world. Oops. I'm sorry. Is this really one of the worst NES games ever made? It probably is, possibly. Last 30 years I've been feeling bad about this game, and I've lost the anger, but hopefully after the talk I'll feel a bit better. First I want to just play a little video that says how I feel right now.
Honest! I ran out of gas! I had a flat tire! I didn't have enough money for cab fare! My dust didn't come back from the cleaners! An old friend came in from out of town! Someone stole my car! There was an earthquake! A terrible flood! Locust! It wasn't my fault! I swear to God!
So there you go, that's my fault. But mostly I'd like to apologise to this guy who wrote to me recently and whose life I've apparently completely ruined. I get messages like this every now and then, and it's weird because this is like from 25, 30 years ago. But clearly I've caused great emotional stress to a large number of people. And to be honest, when I saw this message, I was quite upset. Because of the terrible spelling and grammar. If you insult me, at least spell check beforehand, because I'm likely to make your abuse public and embarrass you. So, there you go, that's a corrected word. Yes, I'll be able to help out this guy. I never have a few spare hours to do things with his life and put and play my games. I also wanted to make a big comment before getting too far into the talk about memory. So this quotation seemed appropriate to me because it was 30 years ago, and probably most of you people here don't remember anything from 30 years ago. But what I'm telling you today is what I remember. I've got almost certainly things that have been combined and changed, and the order's different, and I've forgotten stuff, and remember stuff that didn't happen, but maybe enhanced it to make it a better story. So first a little bit about who I am. So in 1985, my big break was with Melbourne House. Before that I worked on a wharf, driving trucks and unloading boats. And then for another year or so I was a technical assistant at CSIRO in a part-time position. But at home I was learning how to program video games and taught myself how to program and assemble machine code on a Atari 800. Before that I had a scientific challenge at 1B. And I've got a pretty cool game called QB. My boss at CSIRO saw an ad wanted video game programmers from Melbourne House. And so he gave it to me, and I sent my game off to Fred after Melbourne, who was the boss of Beam. The Melbourne House is doing the same thing, I just changed names. And all of us old timers think of it as Beam, so we're Beam people or Beamers. So I know how I got on the spot, and that was the start of it. I moved to Melbourne from Hellfire, and I worked in the games industry for 15 years, based in Melbourne, and then Sydney and Chicago as well. So, although being moved around a fair bit, I was in South Melbourne area, and the first building I worked in was across the other side of the road from this one, but it's been pulled down now. So, I just thought I'd pull this one up because this was quite an interesting location. Because on the left in the picture was the Salvation Army. On the right was the box. And we didn't know which way to go when we came out the door. And in the middle was Beam. So this picture is, this is an Easter egg that was hidden in one of Beam's games by, not me, but I had to keep this kind of semi-secret. So a guy got some extra space on the cartridge, and he wasn't a very happy person. And he ended up putting pictures in there as an Easter egg with a cheat code of the building, of course, but a number of the people, and some of those weren't very nice. But there's some really cool and interesting people, and many of us are still in touch with each other, Facebook friends. And I met my wife, Anne, who's here today. She's working for Landscape in America, and I was showing me down here in Melbourne. And yeah, things happen. So we've been together since 1989. So this is one of the pictures from that Easter egg. I've blurred the name to keep the program happy, but this is a pretty good indication of how I felt when I was programming Bad Street Brawler. We all had a pretty stressful time. We look back on it and go, you know, wow, great to be a part of the industry, but it was difficult, you know. So the game I'm going to talk about today is Bad Street Brawler, which started on Commodore 64. It was originally called Street Hustle. It was released in the USA as Bad Street Brawler, also Bob and Rumble, and a few days ago that was also called WrestleMan in the same country. A pretty cool title scheme here with pixel art by Russell Hunt. And pretty much every single pixel was drawn by hand. We didn't have brushes, we didn't have much cut and paste, it was just dot, dot, dot. So it was hard for the artists to do it. And Landscape logo, that's where I worked when she was in Chicago. So I'm just going to show you a little video of Bad Street Brawler. It was a tongue-in-cheek, side-scrolling beat-em-up, and you know, it was meant to be weird and zany and funny, and the whole point of it was huge sprites. So this is the Commodore 64 version.
Yeah.
So while I was writing this, the guys were working on reverse engineering as far as the Famicom NES. But it was kind of, you know, it was inappropriate and fun and weird, and I remember Fred, when he first told me what he wanted with this game was he wanted, you know, he wanted things bouncing off the edge of the screen and showing off out the window, you know, just really big, zany cartoon. So, and that's what we got. It was Street Castle was pretty well received. And we never saw reviews when we were programming it down. You know, you program it, was out the door, and that's the last you hear of it. Until maybe, you know, if you're lucky, 6 months later, a magazine comes out with a review. But now we can actually look up the reviews, and so I did that. And so here's a few of them. And most people remember it fondly. You know. What people say after and which makes them feel pretty good. And then this thing came along. Now, as Helen said, Fred actually bought one of these back from Japan, and it was reverse engineered in-house. And let's see. We found out it was a 6502, and I remember at the time thinking, woohoo, I get to program it, right? The same processor as the Commodore 64. And we had like 0 people and 6502 people, so I was a 6502 person. And just about the time I finished Street Castle on the Commodore 64, the reverse engineering team were almost finishing, sort of using that game as a little, can we do this? Can we make sprites smooth? Can we scroll the screen? You know, can we make sounds? So they used data from our game. There was a test for the Nintendo. Okay. Now, but when you have a new machine, you know, what do you do? How do you find out how it works? Well, you look it up on Google, right? Well, there is no internet, so if we needed to know how something worked, we had to pretty much figure it out ourselves. And the reverse engineering team did a pretty good job. It's like detective work, it piece together bits of information, you try things, try and learn. And so the stuff that they were making on that machine was a trial and error tested platform. And basically, I finished Street Castle on Commodore, and Fred said, fantastic, you're next in line for the next game, which is on the NES. And it's almost finished. It'll just take you a couple of weeks to do it. So what Fred saw was a game or something I'm running on the Famicom that looked like the Commodore version, because it had sprites and it was scrolling, but actually it was just nothing. Complete, partially done, poorly done. It was just a test bed. So, and the manual was full of stuff that said, don't know how this works. So we did not understand it very well when I started writing this manual. And we didn't really understand the machine very well, so we didn't know what sort of games were best for the machine. But anyway, the one that I was asked around was the one I just finished on the Commodore. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a comparison between the Commodore and the Nintendo, because this will help you understand why Bad Street Brawler was a bad idea. So the Commodore 64, this is how I do this in low resolution, and roughly 320 pixels across, but the Commodore had 160 color pixels, 4 colors each. And the little white squares are sprites. So sprites are things that you could draw over the top of the screen, independent of the other graphics. And the sprite resolution was 12 pixels across and 21 light scan on step. And we had 8 of them, hardware supported sprites. So you could put 8 of them together, side by side, to make a big matrix of sprites and draw bigger sprites, made of little sprites. And on the Commodore, the 8 times 12 is 96 pixels across, out of the 160 pixels of the screen, so you cover roughly 60% of the screen with sprites. Okay? And in Street Hustle on the Commodore, this is how they were actually allocated. We had 3 sprites for the player, and 2 sprites for one of the enemies, 2 sprites for the other enemy, and the little sprite on the corner was used for like the villain's banana, or the killer actually was a bit wider than 2 sprites when you punch, so we used the little sprite for the arm, because it's shaped like that. Okay? So, let's have a look at the NES. So, NES is 256 pixels across the screen, which is a high resolution in the Commodore. And we had 64 small sprites, but if you use the larger double-height sprites, we actually had 32 sprites, only 8 pixels each. And so the biggest matrix that you could make, because you could only put 8 sprites on a line, if you put more than 8, the Nintendo just didn't display it. You get nothing. Okay? So this is the size of what we could put on the screen. And you see 64 and 256 pixel plus, it's only 25% of the screen. So at best, you're going to cover a quarter of the screen compared to the Commodore's 60%. So, okay. Right, so this is a comparison, roughly, of if we just did things the same way on the Nintendo as we did in the Commodore 64. These are roughly to scale. So you see where we started with big cartoony sprites that fill most of the screen, doing the same thing on the NES. We have tiny little things that we can better see. And the whole point of the game was cartoon, big, banging off the side of the screen when you hit someone, jumping over the frame, and suddenly all that's disappeared. Okay? And it's going to make it worse because Nintendo did let us do bashing up grannies and stuff, and basketballs were even forbidden because it was racist. Alright, so I made this little tool, and this is just a screen capture of it. And basically the idea of this was, rather than doing things in a grid, a preset grid, this tool will find the optimal way of placing sprites over a shape to reduce the number of sprites that we used on every scan. So I rewrote this a few weeks ago. It shows how desperate I was to get this off my chest. And it was pretty cool, and it let us make the sprites a little bit bigger because they're suddenly no longer restricted to the exact grid over their position. So this is the result. This is a screenshot from Bad Street Brawler, Nintendo game, and I mean it's okay. You know, the sprites are pretty big for Nintendo. You could have 3 of them on the screen at the same time. But the punk rock girl there was the basketball instead of the basketballs. And, it was okay, but we realised that it was really not a very good game. And we abandoned it. We were shelved, move on to something else. Which, like, suddenly the sun was shining and I was happy again, and, the world was good. And I started another Nintendo game, and basically, that takes about 6 to 9 months, something like that. And I finished that, and Fred came out and said, great news, it's called Bad Street Brawler. And we're going to use it as a fantastic new controller. But the thing is, he said, find your backup and get around it. We didn't have backups. What's the backup? I actually had to scramble through my old discs and see if I could find a reasonably current copy. So it probably would have been better for the world if I'd actually said, I can't find it, sorry, it's for something else. Right. So it served as a game that did help us develop tools and techniques from scale optimization that made us good for our games. And also built up experience and understanding how the system worked. So, as it says up here, Fred came out to business and used this amazing new controller, and that was, of course, the Kangaroo. That's interesting that you should laugh, because I think Kangaroo is actually a pretty cool piece of hardware, especially for its time. And it used ultrasonics. You put these 3 sensors around your TV, and it will triangulate the ultrasonic signals and give you a pretty accurate position. The thing on the back of the knuckles is the ultrasonic receiver. and it could give you a quarter inch resolution in 3D space over 6 feet of distance. Okay, so it was pretty precise. But it also used this mode, that was raw mode. So, let's raw mode, accurate and quick, 3D quarter inch over 6 foot. We also used this thing called gesture mode. And gesture mode was designed so that you could put the smarts of interpreting movement into the glove instead of having to put it into the game. And so, for example, if you wanted to jump, you would basically go like this, okay? And the glove would go, that's the jump. That's send the joystick command to her, okay? And when Mattel were developing or introducing this hardware, they needed to have some games to run with it. And their idea was that they would retro convert all of the popular games by providing a game, Bad Street Brawler, which would give you a menu you could select from to load the glove with the gestures for the game you wanted to play. So you plug in Bad Street Brawler, select Mega Man or whatever, so that and then download to the glove the gestures and unplug Bad Street Brawler, plug in Mega Man, off you go. That's why I call Bad Street Brawler a parasitic host. It was never really, well, okay, but it wasn't really about making a great game for the market. It's just that Bad Street Brawler was available, it was written, Fred was willing to sell it for cheap, and we could supposedly get it to the market pretty quick to provide compatibility. So, but cool, right? Power Glove was cool. No, it's not.
This is frustrating.
Oh, this is horrendous. Jesus, I know why I've never heard of this, because it's so bad.
How do people play this?
Oh, I'm dead. Turn around! Turn around! Damn.
Yes, stand do. And the problem really was that when you're playing an interactive game, you press up, you want to jump. You don't want to go quarter of a second, half a second later, suddenly you get jump. So that's why those guys couldn't play it. It's a stupid idea. Right? If you'd used Power Glove in raw mode, then maybe it would have been a good idea. So it's not such bad hardware, it's just about what you decided to do, gestures. Okay. So I worked 63 days without a break to get back to market. I asked for a weekend off and I was told no. You can't have a weekend off. I sat down at my desk, I worked 34 hours non-stop, and that's pretty tough. And I was on antidepressants at the time. It was not a fun part of my life, but I remember being very fondly as a fantastic part of history, and here we are 30 years later still talking about, the Nintendo market. So many of us gamers are still friends. So, now, this review is pretty accurate, and I don't think there are any good reviews of Bad Street Brawler in this, but how did we get from a reasonably good Commodore 64 down to reasonably bad NES game when the games are practically identical? Okay, so the large sprites from Commodore were integral to the comic effect. It's impossible on the NES, so you can see it. The size also had screenages to be used to great effect, jumping out of the frame. And the characters were wacky. Grannies and road bikers and basketballs, and they were all taken out by Nintendo. And then finally, of course, the Power Glove made it on Robot. Okay, so you look back at Bad Street Brawler as on the top Power Glove game and you think it was crap. Well, it was. But, it's not my fault. So, the real issue, the fundamental technological cultural difference, that meant what was fun working Commodore was quite perverted, quite, and going very long. And for the longest game this time, this game is my shameful past, and I took it very personally. And the feedback that I showed at the beginning of this talk actually did hurt. And that people can send you that stuff is quite interesting, and it's feel there talking to real people. So I want to just show a video. This kind of makes it all work for me now.
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me, alright? Don't fuck with me, Sean. Not you. It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
So one reviewer suggested that we can destroy every copy of the game and make the world a better place. And so I've brought along my own personal copy of Bad Street Brawler, which we're donating to the auction for charity for children. And hopefully,
I'm just going to auction it at the end.
this version. So we're going to auction it here. And if it goes for $1, that's great. Somebody will pay a little bit more, and I'll be happy to either destroy it with a hammer in front of everyone, or I'll sign it for whoever would like me to do that. Well, that's a good job. But a children's charity and a very good cause. And I've got just two more slides to go on together.
One's in a museum.
Acme will take it.
So in closing, I'll share this code with you as well. I found my association with this game to be embarrassing at best, but I've come to terms with it. I didn't have a lot to say in the decisions that were made, but technically I think it's accomplished enough. It just sucks as a game. And as we've seen, it's not my fault. I'm sure of that. But I should be grateful, and I'll be remembered. My history is the author of this one, as Oscar Wilde would say. Oh, no, it's cut out on it. I remember his quote. He said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So thank you very much.
You made such good time, we're so worried about time. So Payne's going to auction the game, and then we're going to take some